y'all, Melissa here with you today, and today we're going to be talking about how to sew double fold bias tape around a curve and have it lay flat. So if your bias tape looks like this, where it won't sit flat and it's puckering up, I'm going to show you how to make that not happen. So this is fairly common for people new to sewing bias tape to have outside curves that like stand up or pucker if you try to make them flat, or puff the fabric up like this, and to have inside curves that stand up. And that's really problematic when you're using bias tape, for example, to finish a neckline, and you've got it standing up like this, and the neckline standing out from your body. So here's the trick, and here's what you'll need to do it. You're going to need iron-safe straight pins. So these have a glass head, which means they won't melt with the iron. And you're going to need your iron, and I'm using a pressing mat here. You can also, of course, use your ironing board. But this is the key to making those curves correct. You're going to start with your bias tape, and you're going to pre-press it into the shape of that curve before you stitch it on. So it's important to think about which way the bias tape is going to be finished. So this bias tape will be sandwiched around this edge, which means I want the open edge of the bias tape here as I press it. I'm going to use a pin, and I'm going to stick it into my pressing mat, and then just going to use my iron here with some steam, and I'm going to shape the bias tape into that curve as I press. So I'm not stretching it, I'm just shaping it around the curve and using that steam to help hold it in place. Once I have the bias tape shaped into a curve like this, then I can go ahead and cut it. And you'll see that if it can lay flat like this before I've stitched it, it can lay flat after you've stitched it. Okay, I'm going to pin the center front here, and we are going to open the edge right where it was, and I'm going to pin it in place. Using a lot of pins in this instance is another way to help keep from stretching the bias tape, because ultimately stretching the bias tape is what makes that not lay flat. Once you have this pin, take it to the machine and stitch it up. Once you have that stitched into place, you'll notice it's kind of like rolling and not wanting to stay flat here. You'll also notice there's little puckers on the edge, but they are not on the stitching line itself. Like there's no puckers there. Then what you're going to do is flip this over, and I am going to roll my bias tape around the edge, and I'm going to pin it over that seam allowance. And then it can be really helpful before you do that last pass of stitching to give it one more quick press, because if you need to remove any of this bias tape and repin or redo, it's easier to do it at this point when you've only stitched once than to do it later when you've stitched twice. And then we'll stitch it up. So there we go, a nice flat double fold bias curve. And the process is the same for these outside curves. You're going to want to position the bias tape the way it will be stitched on. Pin and stitch. So you can see a clear difference between the sample that I pre-pressed the curves and the one that I did not. How these are puckering and these are laying nice and flat. So take the time, pre-press your curves, have a better end result. And check out this playlist for more sewing tips and tricks that you might find useful.